recent trip home to Southern California to visit my family and to attend a family friend's funeral, my dad, brother, and I drove from Thousand Oaks to Orange County, which is like 2.5 hours. And the whole way down, my brother and my dad reiterated a story because they worked together doing sales. And earlier, prior to my arrival, they had been blasted by one of their customers that they worked with in front of everybody. And if you've ever been blasted by someone, you know how this feels. So the whole time they're going on and on and on. And I, in my great wisdom as the oldest sibling, says, hey, I'm curious, you're telling me she was upset with you for something that you didn't do, so there's a disconnect happening. Do you think there's something going on in her personal life? Well, I learned a valuable lesson that day. Don't try to pastoral care your dad and brother. Didn't go over very well. And I got dismissed and they went on ranting and raving about how What's interesting is I got home a couple days later and I got a phone call from my brother. He said, you won't believe this. I said, what? He goes, well, we talked to the woman who blasted us, and come to find out, she's going through a nasty divorce, and one of her parents is dying from cancer. It's really bad. Isn't that what's interesting about anger? It's the tip of the iceberg. But because people come at us so hot and when they're angry, our first reaction isn't to, what's going on with you that you're so upset? Our first reaction is to reflect what they are projecting onto us. Well, I call that armor, right? We put our armor up and we go into that fight mode. Because in that moment, we go into our survival instincts, fight or flight. And fighting typically is that version of anger. And I think it's so instinctual for us that we move into anger before we're even aware that we're moving into anger. And so what happens when anger takes over and we're in that fight or flight mode, that survival mode, it really takes over our whole brain and it locks us in. And there leaves us no space to get really curious about what's happening. Have you been so angry that you can't shake it and you're like, I know I'm so angry, but I can't just stop? You know how to break it in those moments? Those moments of white hot anger. You have to take a cold shower. A really cold shower, or you exercise or go for a run. Why? Because then it gets your brain and shifts it out of that locked and loaded state that we're in when we're angry. Our bodies need a physical reaction to snap us out of it. But here's the thing, like I said, with anger, it's just the tip of the iceberg. More often than not, for many of us, there's only a certain amount of emotions that we're aware of. Right? I'm sad, mad, glad, happy, angry. That's the limit that most people can articulate emotions, when there's actually more than 30. So here's what happens when we're angry. More often than not, we are reacting to a different emotion, what's below the surface. Think about a time when you've been disappointed and you got angry. But in the moment, you're just angry and you don't realize you've been hurt, you feel judged, you're in fear. How often, sometimes people who get angry are overwhelmed. So they'll react in anger rather than saying, I'm freaking out right now and I'm completely overwhelmed and I need some help. So that's why we always want to be aware when we are in anger, what is really going on inside us. Here's the second thing about anger. It's seen as a negative emotion. How many times have you gotten angry and in the moment you feel justified that you're angry and then it calms down and you thought, what the heck did I just do? What was I doing? And then you feel terrible about yourself and you're thinking, why did I let myself get so angry? How come I react in such a way that I hurt my spouse or a family member or a loved one or even the stranger at the coffee shop who had nothing to do with what I was angry about? And you start feeling bad about yourself. Well, because I think what's happened in our society is anger has been seen as this negative emotion that is not allowed. Now, certain families grew up in a way that said certain emotions were not allowed in your family. Anger is one, right? It's a bad emotion. You're not supposed to be angry. You're not supposed to get mad. So happens is that people don't know then what to do when they do experience those emotions. So oftentimes people have learned just to stuff it down, but if you just keep stuffing down anger, what ends up happening? Explosions. It gets released in unhealthy ways. Now, if you grew up in a household that permitted anger, maybe not permitted is the right word, but had anger, right, and expressed it, maybe it was also not expressed in healthy ways. Like, no one followed up after an angry explosion and said, hey, I'm so sorry, I was actually really overwhelmed at work today. And so we have not followed through with teaching one another how to deal with our anger in healthy ways. To sit down and say, it's okay to be mad, it's okay to be angry. So it's no wonder that we as a society see anger and feeling mad as a negative emotion. But here's the truth. When we look at the Bible, our Creator, God, we are made in God's image, got angry. Now, we would say that God is slow to anger, but God still got angry. And we know Jesus got angry. And so it is a part of who we are. And it's not a bad part. It's not something we need to feel guilty about. But instead, what we need to be able to do is channel that in healthy ways. And this is what Mr. Rogers fully understood. If there's one thing that I want to take away from Mr. Rogers and leave with you all too, is that he really allowed people to feel what they felt and never put a judgment on it. But what he tried to help kids understand was that it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be mad, but that didn't mean a free license to act any way you wanted to. But he saw a direct correlation. If you could hold your anger and channel it in safe and healthy ways, that directly impacted how you treated yourself and how you treated your neighbor. Right? It's a neighborhood. He was not under the impression that a neighborhood was this passive, everyone got along, utopia. He knew that conflict happened in the neighborhood. He knew that kids got angry. He knew that people would fight. But he wanted to teach kids a different way rather than just retaliation. You hurt me, I'll hurt you back. Right? You're angry at me, I'll be angry at you back. And so this is why it was one of his favorite subjects to address. He knew the feeling of emotional fury. It's really hard to think of Mr. Rogers like you have emotional fury. But I think that's because he was so in touch with his feelings that he really worked on himself. He referred to it as inner violence. Can you think of a time when you've been so mad at yourself that you beat yourself up? I mean, no one knows what you're thinking to yourself, but the thoughts that we think, it is violence to ourselves. It destroys the image of God. It dismantles the idea that we are beloved children of God. And so he spent much of his professional life making sure that we knew ways to tame this destructive potential. He wanted children to know it's okay to be angry. He wanted them to know you're not bad if you get angry.